Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And this is part 3 of On the Brink and Pepe Escobar. I've been trying to get to the Pepe Escobar article for 3 days now. Hopefully today I will have better luck. But what we're on the brink about, of course, is we, the Western powers, have given approval for Ukraine to use weapons supplied by us to attack targets inside, of Russia. In one of these attempts, the Ukrainians destroyed a Russian early warning radar that had nothing to do with the war in Ukraine itself, but was there to warn Russia in case of nuclear war. So destroying that radar left a hole in their nuclear defense. Putin, Sergei Lavrov, and Sergei Rybakov, the foreign minister of Russia, and the deputy foreign minister, respectively, gave very stern warnings saying that attacks like these could have serious and/or fatal consequences. So the last 2 streams, I've been seriously discussing these warnings with the aid of videos from Scott Ritter and others. I also read a very comprehensive article by Ron Unz and analyzed and commented on that, which suggested the way in which the Russians ought to retaliate to underline the warning that they gave. Tonight, I want to dig into yet another video. This one from Larry Wilkerson. And this was done, on Nima Alkershid's show. And this was a discussion also of the seriousness, the reality of the warnings. So if you excuse me for a second, I'm going to share this to Facebook. And there is Dee Pierce. Hello, Dee. Also a number of other people here, but they have not said hello or commented as well. So I'm going to start right off with a Larry Wilkerson video, which I will go through with many comments.
Maybe India would support.
Sorry, going back to the beginning.
And that's legit. But look at what that.
Won't let me go back.
And I would too.
There we go.
This was an egregious abridgment of his rights as an American citizen and a violation of several constitutional amendments. First of all, it was Customs and Border Patrol. Second, they did not.
What he's talking about here is the confiscation by the government, people from Customs, and Border Control, they claimed on orders from the State Department the confiscation of the passport of Scott Ritter at the airport just before he was going to travel to Russia on a people-to-people peace tour. Also, Judge Napolitano was supposed to go with him on that trip, but after the confiscation of the passport, Scott called the judge and basically advised him not to go because he wasn't able to guarantee his safety at that point. So I'll go on now with what Larry Wilkerson has to say.
Give him names, and he admits he forgot to ask for them. He was so shocked. I mean, he had the Petersburg conference on his mind, and that was going through his head, and he really was very much surprised by what was happening.
That was the economic conference in St. Petersburg that was to involve some 25,000 people, and Scott was to make a presentation to the conference, as also was Larry Johnson, whose warning we took up on yesterday's show. Going on.
I had this happen to me one time when I was going to Cuba, so I sympathized and empathized with what he was saying. They said, give us your passport. Do you have any other travel documents and such? No, I don't. This is my travel document. I'm an American citizen. Give us your passport. Didn't give him a receipt, which is mandatory under such circumstances, and didn't explain to him. And when he asked questions like who authorized this, they said the State Department. Who at the State Department? We don't know. Who at Customs and Border Patrol okayed it? We don't know. Who gave you your orders? We don't know. At that point, I think I would have said, okay, confiscate me, take me to your leader. Take me to your...
Okay, who is Colonel Wilkerson? Larry Wilkerson. Of course, he's from the U.S. Army, as it says on the screen. But for those who don't know, he was the longtime chief aide or chief of staff to former Secretary of State Colin Powell. Very good friend of Colin Powell's. After his service in the government, he retired to a position at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville. Oh, I'm sorry, not that. He retired to William and Mary, that division of the university. Not that close to Washington, actually, maybe 3 hours away. It's a little closer if you go to Charlottesville, and closer still if you go to George Mason. But he went to William and Mary, and he has served there happily now for many, many years as an academic. But anyway, that's who he is. He's a very, very perspicacious commentator, very popular for his commentary and his analysis in the area of foreign affairs.
Your boss, I want to see him right now. I want to see the detachment here at JFK, because there is one there. I want to see that, and then I want to go higher. I'm going to go as high as I have to go. I'm going to go to Joe Biden if I need to. That's, but Scott was sort of flummoxed by the whole thing. Totally wrong procedure. My son-in-law is a policeman. I've been through the procedures for this sort of thing with him 100 times. This is not what you do. This is not how you act. This is disgraceful for both Customs and Border Patrol and these agents. Remind me of the young FBI that came to my house that I told, if you're FBI, I'm Jesus Christ. Get out of my house. Because they were so illy dressed, so rampantly stupid, and didn't offer any ID until I really kind of forced it out of them. This is the American government today, I'm sad to say. This is the way we do things. And of course, Scott talked about the group that was formed with State Department attendance at the formation meeting in Kyiv by the Ukrainians to go after what they call, quote, information terrorists, unquote. And that includes, Scott was assuming, and I would too, since they use the word terrorist, not only jail time, confiscation of travel documents, as with him and such, but also killing you. And with the Ukrainians, I would say it absolutely includes killing you if they can get to you and it's opportune to do so. This is unbelievable that it's happening in the United States of America. I don't care who Ukraine is or what they are, it's unbelievable. It's what we're accusing Vladimir Putin of doing. I think what we're looking at here is, people say, well, Scott is all for Russia. That's hogwash. Scott is telling the truth.
That was one of the most blunt answers to that kind of objection I've ever heard. Hogwash. Scott was telling the truth.
As are Ray McGovern and a host of other former intelligence people who know what's going on. It's not a mystery what these Customs and Border Patrol did. Violation of every aspect of the Constitution protecting individual rights, including search and seizure and also freedom of speech. How does Scott now? How do I get my passport back? Blinken? Do I go to Blinken? Jeez, I'd fear I'd never see my passport again. How do I get my passport back?
Yeah, Larry has a great sense of humor, if you haven't heard him before. And he uses it to great effect.
No numbers to call, no people to find, other than the very top. This is insanity. Now, having been at the State Department and having fielded many, many complaints from American citizens about our passport service, I can sympathize with the fact that Americans sometimes don't like the arduous task they have to do in order to secure a passport, let alone get one if you lose yours or whatever.
Yeah, I've had that experience, a number of times. Today, my passport has expired. I hate to think what I'd have to go through if I suddenly needed another passport.
So it is a difficult process, but how to make it more difficult? Don't give the guy any redress except calling Anthony Blinken. You take, that's another constitutional violation. You take the right of a citizen away to travel when you pull that document. That's a violation of the Constitution. That Congress funded the very thing that was happening in Ukraine with its money that set up this group that pretty much put these draconian conditions on travels and on information terrorists, their term, makes them complicit and is a violation of the Constitution too. It's like passing an act to go after a single individual, You can't do that, Congress. But I could say you can't do that about individual rights all day long today. And from Trump to Biden, there seems to be no limit to what they'll do to violate those rights.
So, of course, that's the shame of it all, and that's the truth of it all. Our government agencies, state, local, and federal, are violating our constitutional rights every day. I think the right to travel has been a little more sacred than that, but still, those officers felt free to go up to Scott and to take away his passport, which is his operational right to travel. And as far as anybody knows, he hasn't got his passport back yet.
Right now, they're officially saying that Ukrainians can attack Russia using the Western weapons. And how do you see this situation right now? How dangerous is the situation that the Biden administration is creating for all of us?
Very much, especially for Europe, but ultimately for us too. And let me just give you some examples. And this is not just military protocol. This is the rules of warfare, land warfare. If we train F-16 pilots in Poland, or train them in Hungary, we wouldn't do it in Hungary, train them in the Baltic states or whatever, they're legitimate targets. They are legitimate targets under the rules of war. That is to say, they're training to go to Ukraine and fight, drop bombs on, shoot airplanes down, whatever, of Russia. So you're in your perfect right to go after that training facility, that logistics facility or whatever. Now that pertains to all the countries, Germany, France, Poland, wherever. There are people being trained or equipment being readied or refueled or refurbished or whatever for the war in Ukraine. Russia has disregarded that to this point, but they were in their perfect right in terms of the rules of warfare to go after those facilities. And it would not be expanding the war to NATO, not in the strict sense of the law. They're going after facilities in those countries that are aiding and abetting the prosecution of war against them by the state of Ukraine. And that's legit. But look at what that opens up. If Putin were to do that, and so far he has more or less refrained from that, but he's in his perfect right to do that. And I dare say China, Iran, North Korea, the whole BRIC complex, maybe Turkey, maybe India would support him in this, whether it was at the international court or whatever. He's in his perfect right to go and bomb those facilities or in some other way destroy those facilities or try to in those NATO countries. We're just opening up Pandora's box here. And Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken are stupid men. They are stupid men. They are walking this country and vassal states like England and Europe into a war, a much bigger, more dangerous war.
So look how directly he speaks. He calls them stupid very, very emphatically. He talks about vassal states, okay, of the United States. Now, Larry Wilkerson is a former military person, okay, and a Republican, and he talks about vassal states and refers to the leading foreign policy authorities in the United States as stupid men. He's going to go further.
War that has every prospect eventually of leading to an exchange of nuclear weapons. This is just insanity. When I was talking to these mid-level bureaucrats today, I thought I would probably get, a sort of a look of he's crazy on their face, at least some of them. No, I got head nods, that they understand what this is about. They understand the difficulty and the danger, and they understand the lack of leadership, the lack of coherent, good leadership at the very top. And that's very frustrating for that level because you can't do anything about it. You either follow orders or you walk. Now, increasingly, people are walking, especially in the Foreign Service. But that's really a terrible situation, predicament to put these people in.
The question is, who's running the show in the United States behind the scene in this dangerous time that we're living?
That's a good question. I don't think it's old Joe completely. I think old Joe has got locked into a domestic political situation that he can't get out of. And every day that goes by, Trump launches some kind of campaign.
I'm going to skip ahead.
Understand what's really at stake right now at this stage of war and how close we are getting to a nuclear war, a major war for Europe. As you've mentioned before, the problem would be mainly Europe. Europe would be devastated if anything happens between NATO and Russia. At the same time, we're witnessing that they're talking about putting NATO troops into Ukraine. The Daily Telegraph reported that NATO is drawing a plan to move US troops to Russia's border. When it comes to this type of mindset, in your opinion, what they're seeking, if they do that, let's assume they do that, what would be the outcome of this type of actions?
As I understand what you're talking about, their language is something like we're opening up lanes, we're opening up troop access corridors for entering the conflict. Now, I can put two interpretations on that. One, they're trying to put pressure on Putin, and two, they're serious. or maybe both. If they go from the putting impressions or interpretations on Putin to influence a negotiating position at a peace conference, that's one thing. If they're really serious and they're going to move troops along those axes, even just up to the border and threaten, but certainly crossing the border, then they're insane, as I've said before. Then we're looking at a region-wide war. I'm going to use some language here, and I ask for forgiveness in advance. Some of Europe, much of Europe, Britain leading the way, has been on the U.S. tit for far too long. They suck that milk, and that milk becomes their blood, and they're living off that. And they're so afraid to let go of that tit. They're so afraid to say to America, you are acting not as an agent of order in the world, but as an agent of chaos. And right now, you're bringing that chaos to our backyard.
What I think is important here is Larry's dichotomy of a nation being an agent of order, okay, or an agent of chaos. I've heard him speak before. He thinks that definitely the United States of America, his country, has now become an agent of chaos for the whole world. And I believe he thinks that the United States has become the worst agent of chaos, okay, in the whole world, the worst creator, okay, of disorder, the most frequent creator of disorder, the worst creator, the most severe creator, okay, of disorder.
We need to calm down. And if we don't calm down, our electorates need to throw us out and elect new governments and consult the wisdom of the ages, if you will. We need to think about what we're doing here, because the ultimate outcome could be an exchange of nuclear weapons over which we hope we would have some control, but probably won't have any. And that will set Europe and maybe the rest of the world back for decades, if not longer.
I think he's right about that. It's easy for Europe to become the main victim of exchanges between the Russians, okay, and also the Americans. And it's easy to set back their industry and their development for decades because of the fact that they would be the theater, okay, of war, whereas Russia would be much less the theater. And of course, we still have, okay, our oceans to separate us from conflicts going on over there.
A battleground that could rapidly turn into the end of civilization as we know it. And I'm not just saying that to hear myself saying it. I'm saying that we have forgotten what Russia and us and 7 other nations, but principally Russia and the United States right now, have in our arsenals. We have enough weapons on submarines alone. Submarines alone. Don't count the ICBMs. Don't count the bombs in the bombers. Submarines alone, we have enough weapons to destroy the human race.
I hadn't heard anybody make that particular point, that on the submarines alone, we have enough of these weapons to destroy everything. That, I think, is a particularly important point, and Larry does it from his position as a weapons expert, as a military expert, someone who rose to high ranks and who's been studying the military and the military capabilities for most of his life.
Now we're talking about setting up a situation in the heart of Europe to produce a nuclear exchange. You wouldn't even think we would have gotten to this point. I've been worried about accidents. I've been worried about fire on warning. I've been worried about first use. I've been worried about the Chinese building out their nuclear arsenal. Those aren't worries of mine anymore. My worries are the stupid, idiotic, incomprehensible leadership in the United States.
It would be amazing for Zelensky dragging the United States into this conflict and starting a major war. He's trying to do his best to drag the United States into this conflict, in my opinion. And it seems that he's achieving something on the battlefield.
You're asking me a question I simply can't answer anymore. I can throw out words like insanity, incomprehensible, domestic political politics, and so forth, but I can't really give you a substantive answer to that question anymore. He's a clown now. He is what he was before. He's a comic, but he's a very, very poor comic, and he's a clown. And why we are holding on to him, this business of Ritter and this group that Scott described, that they've set up with State Department complicity to label people information terrorists who are detracting from the Ukrainian war effort by their words and their gestures on media. That's what it's set up to do, to go after those people as if they were terrorists in the traditional sense of the term. I don't know what they're going to do in Guantanamo if they've got to put thousands of people down there in Guantanamo who will be information terrorists. But this is the kind of thing that takes me back to what I would call the old Ukraine, the Ukraine of corruption, the Ukraine of nothing but Nazi-like people. It takes me back to original reasons for Putin to be worried about his Russian citizens in Ukraine, if not other things too, because these people are history's bad people. They are history's killers. They are history's murderers. Just go back and look at World War II, look at some of the things that were done by the Ukrainian partisans to everyone. They didn't care whether you were a Nazi, you were an ally, you were a Frenchman, you were a German, you were Italian, whatever. All they wanted was your money and your teeth and your death. And if you had any women with you, they're women to rape. I mean, everybody knows that, but now everybody has colored Ukraine as if it's somehow different. And I'm sure there are lots of good people in Ukraine, some of whom have lost their lives fighting for their country. And there's not this overwhelming corruption that there was, for example, in the early 2000s when I was dealing with it. I didn't even want to deal with it. I told Powell, I don't want to have anything to do with these people. They're so corrupt, I can't see through it. It's insanity, one leader after another. And I thought Zelensky was going to be a breath of fresh air. But it turns out Zelensky is a bigger comedian than anything else. And yet he's turned himself into a deadly comedian, and a comedian that's taken his country. I looked at the map today. I looked at the map and I looked at the drawing that had been very carefully done by some military people, actually in Germany. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, holy mackerel, look at that. Look at what the Russians now have or threaten seriously, including Odessa. It's not but a month or two till Zelensky won't have much of Ukraine left at all in terms of importance of the areas that are going. And Putin will have not only the Russian enclaves that he was worried about under his control, complete control, but he will also have some more of Ukraine. All this can do is inexorably move further and further and further west. And why we can't see that, why Zelensky can't see that, and why he can't reach into that disaster and pull out some success, which would be a ceasefire and a peace treaty, which Putin has said again. Putin is making every effort to do press conferences and other things that essentially say, I don't want the whole of Ukraine. Let's talk. But let's talk with me present rather than go into Switzerland with a bunch of people that don't make any difference in the situation. We won't listen. I've got to say, as I said to these people today at George Washington University, I said, no one is listening. Not only does no one have any empathy, no one can, I said, don't think about that term in its, positive humanitarian sense. Think about it in this sense, military sense. You don't ever put yourself in the enemy's shoes. You don't ever know what he's thinking or want to know. This is the worst thing. We don't want to know what he's thinking. We don't listen to him. Well, Lavrov has grown so irritated at it that he just spits venom now. And I don't blame Sergei at all. But Putin is still trying to say that he does not want Ukraine, He just wants a ceasefire. He wants a settlement, and he's going to dictate some of the terms of the settlement. And since he's won, he's probably going to dictate most of it, at least in terms of who gets what and where and such, and the oblast that he's concerned about. We need to take him at his word on that and go to negotiations. I understand one reason why we don't want to go, because we have no diplomats who could do damn well to win anything. We lose everything.
So he points to a very serious weakness that we in the United States have. Our diplomatic corps has gone. We've allowed our diplomatic corps to deteriorate until there's very little capability in it. So it's hard for us to sit down and actually negotiate.
To negotiation. I realize that now. We have no one. Bill Burns should head the delegation. Bill Burns should be there and say, tell everybody else to go away. Blinken, go away. Sullivan, go away. Go away, Biden. I need to be given full latitude to negotiate, because there are no other diplomats in the American government. This is a tragic situation. We have come to the end of our rope in a most tragic way. And Ukraine is going to be the fire at the end of that rope if we're not careful. And as I said before, it could be a nuclear fire. And that's just, we brought the whole of humanity into this disaster, if that's the case. The word on the street that I heard, which was so vivid and so accurate, was from one of the 3.6 billion, I'll say out there now, who really hates our guts. The United States, regardless about what I thought or how I felt about this or that particular act, was in large part a force for order in the world. Now it is a force for chaos, an agent for chaos. That's something.
The agent of chaos point once again. And the change in people's attitudes towards the United States. Very central to what's going on.
Sums it up. And Biden, Blinken, and Sullivan are the orchestrators of the chaos.
In your opinion, with the current situation of NATO, if they get involved in a direct war with Russia, how capable is NATO against Russia?
Not very. I answered a congressman's question, two congressmen, a senator and a representative's question the other day in writing. And I said, be careful what you wish for, dudes. I didn't say dudes, but I said, be careful what you wish for. You are going to get a rare awakening. You're going to have to mobilize. And when you try to mobilize, you're going to find out you can't. And when you try to institute conscription, you're going to find out you can't. You're going to have more young people going to Canada or Mexico. Mexico now looks like a good place to go than you are enlisting. And don't think that you're going to get them to go off to Europe to defend Europeans in a foreign war a long way from home with the track record you've established over the last 22, 23 years in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and so forth. Because now the propensity to serve in the armed forces amongst American young people is 9%.
A stunning figure. The propensity to serve, based on survey research data, only 9%, the lowest in modern history.
The lowest it's ever been. And you have no reserves to speak of because they were 33 and 40% short on recruitment, and they are at what we call level 4, level 5 unready in personnel, training, equipment, every category of readiness. You cannot mobilize. So what will you do? One of them was honest with me and said essentially, well, we'll come home from Europe and let the Europeans handle it. Well, what if it's nuclear by that time? We won't come home from Europe if it's nuclear. We'll use our nuclear weapons. In fact, I'm very worried we'd be the first to use them rather than the second, because when you go conventionally, when you open those corridors for pouring those forces through, you're going to find out the Russians eat those forces up quicker than you can pour them through. And you're also going to find out that their doctrine is true. that if you pour them through in a really operationally sound way, masked, let's say, in two prongs of attack or whatever, with everybody there, the Germans, the French, and everybody else, you might constitute a fairly formidable force initially. They'll hit it with tactical nuclear weapons. They have said they would. That's their doctrine. What are you going to do then? Well, I know what they're going to do. They're going to escalate. They're going to escalate. Now, they think, and they came back with this answer to me, no, then we're going to hit them with so many PGMs, so concentrated from so many airplanes and so many rockets and so many cannons and such that they're going to be devastated. And I'm going to say, where are you going to get those? Because we've used most of them in Ukraine and given a lot of them to Israel. So where are you going to get those? You're going to make them overnight? I'm sorry, you don't have the foundries. You don't have the ammunition places. You don't have the shipbuilding facilities. You don't have the workforce. You can't do any of this stuff. We're going to surround them with NATO's maritime force. A maritime force which operates and exercises together all the time and looks so wonderful and splendid and everything. But you go to war with that force and you will find out that you have 32 freaking nations, not one. And you're going to have a real problem because about 12 or 14 of them aren't going to put their ships to sea because they're scared. You know, this is crazy. I can't say it enough times. We need leadership so badly in Washington, and we need it tomorrow. Yesterday, not down the road, or we're going down a path that is irretrievably bad.
Yeah. Turkey just said that if NATO wants to attack Russia or involved in a direct conflict with Russia, they're not going to be part of any sort of operation against Russia. And
that's what I heard. In fact, a friend from Istanbul called me last night in the wee hours. And I haven't been able to recontact him, but he told me that Erdogan had said he was leaving NATO. And I went all through the media. I checked all the YouTube channels and everything else trying to find confirmation.
Yeah, me too.
Found one hint at it, but I came to the conclusion that he must have heard Erdogan making a speech somewhere because he said all sorts of things lately. And Erdogan probably pulled that back really quick if he actually said it. But it is something that could be in the wind. And I wouldn't blame Erdogan. Politically, domestically, he's losing it. Finally, he's losing his hold on the Turkish population. And so he's desperate to do things that'll get him back and doing this sort of thing with respect to Israel, for example, that he's been doing, saying that Netanyahu is a slave driver or should be in hell and all these other things, Satan. They're politically oriented as much as anything else. And so would a statement that he's leaving NATO be, I think, but I'm not sure. I think you hit on something there. The fact that he's even hinted at it or let it out that they might be thinking about it is serious. We're taking the most competent land army in NATO out of NATO. And as you just hinted, I believe that even if he hadn't left NATO formally, that land army he would not make available for an attack on Russia. I could almost guarantee that he will not make that land army available for an attack on Russia. So count the most powerful land army in NATO out. And I mean that, more powerful than the United States. Turkey's land army, because of its positioning, its equipment, and its training, is better than ours. So you take that out, what you got left?
Larry's made a few statements, Kay, in this interview that you won't have heard from anyone else. I don't think there's anyone else who has been saying that the Turks have a better land army than the United States. Something to keep in mind, something real.
Can't imagine that the military in Ukraine isn't really, really agitating right now. I don't know how you would find out the genuine nature of it, but they've got to be saying something up the chain. And whether Zelensky is listening to it or not, or just turning it off, or it's being diluted by the level of leadership immediately between him and the military, I don't know. But you can't tell me that people on the front lines in Ukraine who are now defecting to the Russians at an alarming rate aren't fed up with this conflict, and that there aren't some middle-level leaders that aren't trying to get the word up that it needs to stop. It needs to be a ceasefire and then a peace conference. That must be happening. Otherwise, I have to declare all Ukrainians morons, and I'm not prepared to do that. So One of those things is true. They're either cutting it off or he's not listening. Or he's so frightened of what Washington might do if he is listening and devises some scheme to accommodate their concerns that he won't do it. And that just makes us more guilty.
The other sign that show Turkey is changing its attitude toward the East is we know that they wanted to join the European Union since 1999. And right now they're talking about instead of being part of the EU, they want to be part of BRICS. They want to. It's
BRICS.
Yeah, that's changing everything, Larry. And it doesn't seem that in the West anybody's thinking what's going on right now.
Not paying any attention. No empathy again. No empathy for the other person's thinking. Were I Turkey and I was looking at history all the way back 3,000 years, and I was looking at, for example, the study out of Oxford that says from the Xinjiang province in China to Ankara, trade can be accomplished with anyone in that distance because every language is Turkic based. Everyone can communicate enough to do trade in that band. That's unbelievable. And it was at one time what linked all of that in the greatest trade apparatus the world's ever seen. In terms of actual profit and production of wealth, it outstrips ours today. Outstrips everything in the world today. Bretton Woods, the whole thing. If you read Frankopan's book, The Silk Roads, A New World History, you understand that that was really probably in relative terms, the height of world civilization. Well, it's there, latent right now. And the Chinese know that, I think. Some of the Chinese do. And the Turks know that to a certain extent. The guy who wrote the article, or not an article, huge book about the linguistic capabilities of that belt, if you will, think Belt Road Initiative, essentially says, once someone recognizes that again and builds that out in the sense of modern economies, then you're going to have the center of the world again. The center of the world was not North America and Western Europe for a long, long time. It was Persia, the Eastern Roman and Western Roman empires and such. We're moving back, I think, slowly but surely into that kind of recognition of where the world's real commerce probably generated and should be again. China's taking advantage of that. And China was taking advantage of it at that time, too, as you probably well know. And the medium of exchange was silk a lot of the time. Roman soldiers carried silk in their saddlebags, not gold. You don't want gold in your saddlebag. It was too damn heavy. So you carried silk, and it was a medium of exchange. Same thing with other things that were lighter than gold or silver. They're now finding coinage all the way up in the Scandinavian countries that came from this time period. This is one of the things that Frankopan takes advantage of, the new archaeological finds in Scandinavia and elsewhere to write his history. It's coming again. It's coming again, and it has all the language and economic and financial capabilities. And the BRICS, inchoately at least, if not historically and intellectually, recognize this. The Chinese certainly do, intellectually and historically, and they're going to take advantage of that. Here's the interesting thing. Ukraine was going to be an entrepot in Europe for China. It was going to be the place sort of where the BRI ended and flooded out across Europe, you know. It's compromised that completely now, just completely. So look at Turkey and say, why aren't you going to be that, Turkey? Why aren't you going to be that entrepot? Why aren't you going to feed the EU its future rather than the EU feed you your future? And everyone's got to be thinking about that. He's not stupid. And there's some Turkish people that aren't stupid either. And they understand this historical reality and the wave of history that's washing over Central Asia again. We don't. I'll bet you there isn't a person in the Biden administration who can tell you anything about what I just said. I will bet you.
So, what a perspective that is. What a historical perspective. What a vision for looking forward that is, too. It's very, very important. I think I've covered what is most important in that video from Larry. Now I want to introduce, a little bit of a contrasting perspective on the warning and how serious, it is. Because on Judge Napolitano's program today, he had a guest, Professor Gilbert Bedoctoro, who's a Russian expert, Russian authority. Let me pull this back just a little, and I'll start it off again. If it quits buffering.
He's a great person, and then got tired of teaching at Princeton, was a candidate for the presidency of the university, didn't get it. And Ronald Reagan made him the Librarian of Congress, which is the largest library in the world. He was ecstatic. His last...
Okay. That's really not too relevant. So,
out by reminding the audience what they have heard me say before. France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Sweden, and the United States have all authorized Ukraine to use offensive weaponry that those 5 countries have sent to Ukraine to attack targets inside Russia. How dangerous is this for those 5 countries? What do you expect, forgive the double question, Professor, the Russian response will be?
Nobody knows what the Russian response will be, and that is a problem. It's a problem within Russia. President Putin has come under substantial pressure from the chatting classes in Russia for not having pinned down what Russian responses may be, and for allowing himself and Russia as a country to be considered bluff in the West. Various Western countries have crossed a number of red lines that Russia has laid down from time to time without suffering any penalty for that. And there are those in Washington and in Western Europe who are saying that this is also a bluff and there'll be no price to pay for any attacks that are made using French, British, American missiles, long-range missiles, going from Ukrainian territory and hitting strategic targets in Russia or residential targets, because the Ukrainians have been quite interested in creating havoc and terror in Russia. Mr. Putin yesterday gave one answer to this question when he had a conference with representatives of leading press, various media organizations from 16 countries. And he was asked just the question you've posed, what will happen next? And he said that Russia could respond in an asymmetrical manner, giving to countries which are in a position to cause substantial damage to American assets, weapons that they could use for that purpose. What comes to mind, of course, is providing weapons to the Houthis, to the militia in Syria and in Iraq to attack American military bases and personnel in the Middle Eastern region. However, I don't believe that. We can follow Mr. Putin closely. I can read his speeches. I can analyze what he says, and I don't agree with him on everything he says. I think every politician has the right and sometimes the obligation to lie. And I don't know if this was a lie, but I don't think it is an accurate or comprehensive answer to a very pertinent question.
All right, let me run a clip of this very pertinent question. The question is not on the clip, but he does not like the question because the questioner, and you'll see the look on her face when he chastises her, you probably have seen this, the questioner asks him about the use of nuclear weapons. He reminds the world it's a very grave subject. Only one country in the history of the world has used nuclear weapons, obviously the United States in Japan during World War II. But this is about a minute and a half long. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts. You'll understand the Russian, but we're going to play the English translation for the sake of the audience. Chris, cut number 7.
There are always accusations flung at us that we are nuclear cyber rattling. But am I the one asking the question about the possible nuclear war? You were the one to ask the question. You are pushing me towards this question, and then you'll say that I've been, brandishing the nuclear truncheon. This is a very grave subject. The US is the only country to have used nuclear weapons during the Second World War. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 20 kilotons. Our tactical nuclear weapons is 75 kilotons, just the tactical nuclear weapons. So let's not push the situation towards the point when even a threat is involved, let alone the use of nuclear weapons. For some reason, the West believes that Russia is never going to resort to that. But we've got the nuclear doctrine in place. Have a look at it. What does it say? It says that someone else's actions threaten our sovereignty or territorial integrity, then we believe we have the right to use all the tools at our disposal. And no one should take that lightly or superficially. There needs to be a professional view of that.
All the tools at our disposal, no one should take that lightly or superficially. Dr. Doctorow, you are one of the world's foremost authorities on interpreting this man. How do you interpret what he just said?
I think
I thought that the way Judge Napolitano approached that was very, very good. He put a very, very fine point on Putin's warning. And then he introduced us to the idea that the Professor Doctorow, is one of those who has studied Putin very, very closely for years, and who is in a perfect position to really interpret what he is saying. And so he put that key question to Professor Doctorow in a beautiful way, in my view.
it's unfortunate that he phrased his answer in that way because he remains vague and he's staying in the realm of a nuclear response to a non-nuclear threat. I don't believe that that is the scenario that has much likelihood to happen. The question of a Russian response to an attack on critical infrastructure coming from Ukraine, being guided by American, British, or German or French manufacturers and experts of the equipment of the missiles that have been sent Russia's way. This is can be read variously. I think that some of my peers and people who have appeared on your show, I think of Scott Ritter's presence 2 days ago, in which the assumption was that this challenge that is approved by Biden and approved by Sunak and by Macron can lead us straight to a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. In a communication this morning that it was on Sonar, Larry Johnson was saying the same thing. I'm not a subscriber to that. First of all, Mr. Putin is a very, very sober man. He is not a gambler. And even though I myself have written last week that Russia has a first strike capability in the sense that it could so damage America's nuclear potential that it would win on a first round, on reconsideration, I think that is highly improbable for a course of action by Russia led by Mr. Putin. What is much more likely, and I think his answer yesterday is a way hinting at the kind of response we can expect from Mr. Putin, although I don't agree that the first response will be to provide weapons to people in the Middle East. I think the first response would be to destroy Kiev. I mean, to knock out, to decapitate the government in Kiev, and possibly, after giving a sufficient warning of a day or two to get the civilians out, leveling the city. I think that that is likely because there'll be no blowback. Nobody in Western Europe, not to mention the States, will shed a tear if Kiev disappears. If that doesn't solve the problem, and if there's still attacks coming from Ukrainian territory, supposedly by Ukrainian forces, the next step, and this is not, I'm not pulling this out of the air, it is a point that's been made on Russian talk shows, what they would like to see happen. They will demolish the Polish airport and logistical infrastructure that has been enabling the Ukrainians by serving as a go-between between U.S. deliveries and West European deliveries and further shipments into the Ukraine across the border. Again, looking at the situation, yes, you can say that would trigger Article 5. Well, to my knowledge, Article 5 does not require that the other countries respond. It just provides a framework for their responding. And I think it's hardly possible that anyone in Western Europe will give a damn if Poland is struck by Russian forces. And if that doesn't work, then the third in a sequence of responses would be to hit military bases and manufacturing facilities in Germany, England, and France.
So, destroy Kiev, okay, number one. That doesn't work. Destroy the Polish airport. That's allowing these goods to flow in. And three, okay, destroy strategic and industrial sites, okay, in Western Europe, okay, and Germany. So that's the staging. That kind of thinking is how he thinks the escalation of the conflict would be managed by Putin. If they don't say uncle to the destruction of Kiev, they don't say uncle to the destruction of the key Polish airport and the attack on Poland, then the strategic and industrial bases, okay, inside, okay, of Western Europe. Okay, now the question is whether this ladder of escalation, okay, would have a necessary dynamic. Okay, in other words, where if the Russians retaliated by destroying Kiev and bringing down the government, would that cause the West to resist even more and require the knocking out of the Polish airport? And if the knocking out of the Polish airport happened and you couldn't flow the goods into Ukraine in order to sustain the fight, then would that make the West resist even further? Or is there a dynamic to resistance which would make the West continue to resist in the face of such attacks, okay, by Russia?
You'll note I'm excluding the possibility of a direct Russian attack on the continental United States with nuclear weapons. That is off script. Why? Because it's suicidal. Even if the Russians have this massive, very advanced strategic triad, there's still American weapons come from nuclear-powered submarines with appropriate cruise missiles. They would get through.
Let's hearken back to what Larry Wilson said. He said, those submarines, okay, by the way, it's Wilkerson as opposed to Wilkinson. I'm sorry, I said Wilkinson. What Larry Wilkerson said is that there are enough in the way of nuclear weapons on those subs to destroy the whole of human existence, okay, on Earth. Dr. Doctorow, Professor Doctorow, says for sure some of those are going to get through, and enough to expose Russia, okay, to serious damage. Putin cares very deeply about Russia and about the people of Russia. He's demonstrated that many, many times in how he's managed things since he first took over in 1999, the last 25 years. That he holds the welfare of the Russian people at the center of his activities. He's not a corrupt leader, okay, in the sense that he does things for personal gain or for himself. He tries to do things for the Russian people. So he would care about that. He would care about Russia sustaining damage it would not be able to recover from for a very long time, perhaps ever.
And there would be massive losses of life in Russia. He is not a gambler.
Okay.
So I think this is the scenario, or a scenario, that is more probable.
That is a very sober analysis. It's an endearing analysis because it gives us some cause for hope. Do you?
Okay, so that's enough of that. I think it does give us some cause for hope, but I would be very much interested in how Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson, okay, and Larry Wilkerson, and others, Colonel McGregor, who've been talking about the chain of responses and counter responses here that would lead us, okay, inevitably to nuclear war, okay, with Russia. I wonder how they would respond, okay, to this argument. It seems pretty reasonable to me that while Russia would take some devastating steps, okay, to retaliate and to tell the Western powers, stop this now, they might not use the most extreme means and extreme tools that they have in order to do it. So, I didn't want to move on at this point. I'm going to take a look at your comments. John B. says, the U.S. Constitution has been rendered ineffectual by virtue of the reality that Congress allows the deep state to transgress fundamental constitutional rights. The state, quote unquote, is dysfunctional. Yes, it is, John B. I very much agree, but it's not simply the deep state. Okay, there's been a tradition for a long time here in this country to allow the local police to transgress fundamental constitutional rights. This has been going on at the local level, okay, as well, where the rights of freedom of assembly and freedom of speech have been routinely been trampled by local governments, and nobody does a thing to stop them. Okay, when there are lawsuits over this, the local authorities also always get a slap on the wrist. It doesn't stop them. The remedies offered by the courts are completely useless in maintaining the rights, okay, of individuals under the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights in our country is often a dead letter. It's not just the deep state that's responsible for this. Steve Wilkerson says, hello, everybody. Dawn Foster says, the reason why there's so much chaos is because people believe one thing, but our government pushes the opposite agenda. No, the reason why there's so much chaos is because the government pushes coups constantly in other countries whose policies it does not like. It creates actual chaos on the ground, armed clashes, gangs fighting each other, disorder in country after country after country. Disorder in the Middle East. What's been happening, in the Middle East? Instead of bringing the Israelis to the table, forcing them to come to the table, by giving them a blank check, we have been an agent of chaos in the Middle East. Dawn says, we don't want war, but our government is aiding and abetting wars again and again. Yes, it is our government, doing it. Certainly that's true. But it's the actions. It's not simply the government pushing or communicating an agenda. It's the government actually implementing an agenda which runs counter to what the people want, but maybe not counter to what the donors want. John B. says, the electorate is powerless to throw out U.S. governments because politicians and the mainstream media are owned by wealthy donors. Political bribery and mafia standover tactics have been legalized. Greed has won. And Dawn says yes. And I say yes too. And that's why I say dump the corruption. That's why I want to start a dump the corruption movement. One that can be fueled by the power of the ballot box. We can still use the ballot, but we have to reject the corruption, and we have to be thoroughgoing about it. What do I mean by thoroughgoing? I mean, any congressperson or senator that takes any big money's got to be thrown out. Republican, the Democrat, all the people in both parties do it. All the people must be thrown out at the ballot box. John B. says, Bill Burns, the CIA. U.S. sends the CIA to deliver U.S. diplomacy. Burns is employed to be an intelligence operative, not to act as a diplomat. Executive government has treasonously failed. I agree it has treasonously failed, but what Larry Wilkerson was saying is that Bill Burns is the only one who's competent at diplomacy in that group. He's the only one who knows how to be a diplomat. He's the only one who knows how to negotiate a settlement because he was a diplomat and he was a very good one. He knows how to listen to the Russians. He knows how to hear what they say. So he was not talking about what Bill Burns is paid to be at this point. He's talking about what Bill Burns would be paid to be if the government said, here, Bill, you do it. You're the only one who's competent, to do it. At that point, he would be being paid to be a diplomat. And Larry Wilkerson is saying he believes Bill Burns would do a pretty good job at that. But he says he's the only one in the administration that has the capability. Now, that's a pretty forthright kind of statement. And John B. says, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said he believes that joining the BRICS may be a good alternative to the EU. Turkey would like to become a member of the BRICS. Very significant. Yeah. What Larry Wilkerson was saying, is that the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, going through all the nations that are speaking Turkic languages, that this could be the means to build up a level of prosperity not seen, in this world. If these nations could become constituted so as to favor modern economy the ancient prosperity that they enjoyed could be reignited and built to entirely new heights by the BRICS nations and by the Belt and Road Initiative. And even though he didn't mention it, by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. Steve Day joined at 9 o'clock and said, glad to be with you again, and said hashtag dump the corruption 2024. Thank you, Steve Day. John B says, who counts the ballots? Stalin, the people who cast the votes don't decide an election. The people who count, okay, the votes do. It's not quite that bad here in the United States yet. With respect to dump the corruption, it operates according to a blanket rule. If everybody operated according to that rule, the election outcomes would not be a close thing. They wouldn't be a thing you could easily tamper with. They wouldn't change the balance of an election by 5 points or 20 points. They would determine the results of elections by 30 or 40 points, beyond the ability of the powers that be to manipulate it by changing things on the margin here and there. Now, when you say, oh, they have the power to do that, they have the power to nullify elections. Do they have the power, okay, in other nations? Did Brazil have the power to keep Lula out? They did everything they could. They weren't able to keep him out. We see countries in South America, countries that are perfectly able to manipulate elections. But when there's a landslide brewing in different areas, the powers that be cannot stop it. Okay, in Mexico, the powers that be weren't able to stop the victory of the Morena Party in 2018. And they haven't been able to stop the further victory of that party in 2024. We just had a landslide. By the way, I'll be talking about that on Saturday night. Claudia Sheinbaum won in a huge landslide. The conventional political parties only got 28% of the vote. Mexico is a notoriously corrupt sort of place, but they weren't able to steal the election down there. There were too many people voting for Sheinbaum. Just too many people. In a dump the corruption sort of election, there would be just too many people throwing out congresspeople and senators and presidents and presidential candidates for them to do anything about it. Yes, Stalin, the people who cast the votes don't decide an election, the people who count the votes do. That's when the people who are running the government have control of the voting machinery. Our voting machinery is very dispersed and decentralized, okay, across the whole country. It is very hard for the party in power to control the voting machines and the voting machinery across party. They have to do it across party. They can rig the primary elections in various ways, in ways that we saw in 2016 and 2020. But in neither of those elections were they able to rig the final outcome. John B. says they stopped Imran Khan in Pakistan. Sure, but they didn't stop him by screwing up the vote. They stopped him by putting him in jail. That's a different thing. They had control of the machinery to the extent they were able to put him in jail on trumped up charges. And in spite of that, his people still won a lot of elections in that particular election. He was not elected as president, okay, in Pakistan. But a lot of his people were elected to parliament. A lot of his people are still sitting in the government. The government wasn't completely able to shut them out. Okay, so it's now 9:15. D show has started. Let me see if it started. Let me pull things up here and see if D has had a show tonight. I believe she was planning one, but let me just double check and see. Okay, she does have a 9 o'clock show. So I am due over there to help her. So again, I haven't had an opportunity to get to the Pepe Escobar article he published on June 1st of 2024, which was very apropos of what we were talking about here, because it's about Russia, SCO, BRICS, and the normalization, of Afghanistan. And that has to do with building the new Silk Roads, and the Belt and Road Initiative, and doing exactly what we were just talking about in terms of the integration of Europe, and Asia around actually many, many nations that share some form of the Turkic, that fall within the category, of the Turkic languages. I don't know whether Afghanistan does fall in that particular category. It may, to some degree, or it may be part, of the Arabic bloc. I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable to say which, but still, the use of BRICS to integrate the whole area of Europe, and Asia, obviously that is the master plan of the BRICS nations. Oh, by the way, in Africa too. And that's what this article, was about. So I'm still going to hold it open for future streams, but it's time for me to end this stream and to go over and to join D. So thank all of you very much for coming. Hope to see you again tomorrow. What I have in mind for tomorrow is in tomorrow's episode, I'm going to examine President Biden's attack on the International Criminal Court and the implications of that. And I'm also going to comment and analyze episode 1 of Modern Money Authority, a new series from a new educational organization called Understanding MMT. I am part of that organization as a volunteer. And in fact, episode 1 of Modern Money Authority was or is a conversation that I co-hosted with the father of MMT, specifically Warren Mosler. And so I'm going to comment and analyze that conversation on a meta level tomorrow night as well. So I hope to see you then. For now, I'm going to be joining Dee on her show. John B says, bye all. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, John B. Very glad to see you back. I'm going to be ending this right now.